Well, good evening, everybody. This is Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Show. I've got a fascinating gentleman to introduce you tonight, a gentleman that I've known for, I think, probably 30, 35 years now. I actually first met him when I was working for him when he was running for regional councillor in the city of Toronto, in the High Park area, I believe it was. And then he turned out to be, actually, I met him before that when he was involved in conservative politics at University of Toronto. And then subsequently when he ran for regional councillor on the City of Toronto board, and then ended up interacting with him quite a little bit as he ran for and became a member of provincial parliament and Minister of Health in Ontario, and then a federal member of parliament, Minister of Health federally. I might have actually mixed up which one came first. I'm not sure.
No, that's right.
That's right. And you were also the Minister of Health during SARS. And I wanted to interview him primarily because, number one, he's a really nice guy, very smart guy. But then also, number two, he wrote very recently a very provocative article on how we're handling this pandemic. And so everyone meet Tony Clement, former member of parliament, former provincial member of parliament, former Minister of Health in both the federal and provincial cabinets. Tony, how are you tonight?
Hey, it's great to be on your program, to be a bit closer to Mississauga, the greater Mississauga area. This is fantastic.
Now, am I right? You ran for regional council in the city of Toronto at one point in time?
Yeah, I did in High Park, and you were my co-campaign manager. That was in 1994.
Gosh, so, that was a long time ago, Tony.
In a galaxy far, far away.
And so I want to come back to what you're doing now later, but right off the top, what's the argument in this article I read that I described as reasonably provocative?
Thanks. Yeah, the Globe and Mail published an opinion piece I wrote. They published it about 10 days ago, so it feels like it was last century already with everything moving so fast with COVID-19. But the point was that our politicians, our decision makers, society as a whole have to start thinking post-COVID about restarting the economy. And here's some of the factors that you have to deploy, including testing and tracing, including more money to develop a vaccine. And in the business world has to think of a post-COVID workplace, which is going to be very different from the workplace that we were used to beforehand. More physical distancing, more use of telecommuting and teleconferencing, different protocols for visitors in the workplace, these kinds of things. So it was basically setting the table for the discussion that has actually happened in the last 10 days now, as we seek to restart the economy.
Now, do you think people are trying to restart the economy too quickly or not quickly enough?
Where you stand depends on where you sit. If we were having this discussion in Saskatchewan and we talked about their plans to aggressively reopen, I think that is the right decision for Saskatchewan. They've had unfortunately, they've had 4 deaths, but no more. So that they're not a hot spot, they're not a hot zone. May be different for GTA. We might have to wait a little bit longer in the GTA. In my home district of Muskoka, we've had 1 new case in the last 8 days, so not a hot spot. So I think you've got to tailor your rules to the circumstances on the ground, having regard for the fact that people do want to travel, do want to see their families. I get all that, but a staged approach, which is what, and as I mentioned in the article, that's what Austria has started to do. That's what Italy has started to do. The UK now has a staged approach plan. So does France. So does Germany. So this is not quite apart from what you think of the United States. There's a lot of other examples that I think do attest to the fact that Canada's got to be thinking of the same approach.
Now, I know you're a student of history in the Spanish Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, 1919, 1920. Similar situations happened where there was a lot of political pressure to reopen. People reopened, and the second wave that came in the fall ended up being more lethal than the first wave. Is that something?
Yeah. Did you realize, though, that the second wave, the so-called second wave, was only the first wave for Canada? Canada didn't have the first wave. We only had the second wave. So just a little bit of a historical fact about the Spanish flu. And the way they handled the Spanish flu was very interesting. If you were sick, you were quarantined. If a family member was sick, you were quarantined. But if you weren't sick, you went to work. So very different circumstances than the lockdown we have now. Look, what do I know? But I think that the so-called second wave, unless we get a vaccine that is readily available, and that's the other aspect of a vaccine. You not only have to have the science behind a vaccine, it's got to be readily available for your population. So if one of the companies in the United States develops a vaccine, is Donald Trump going to give the vaccine to the rest of the world? Toot sweet? I maybe think not. So, but until you have a vaccine, you're going to have to be coping with COVID in our society. Remember, lockdown was first sold to us as, let's get our hospitals ready. Let's make sure that they've got the surge capacity. Well, they do have the surge capacity. I hope they don't use it, but it is there if necessary.
So, fascinating topic. We're going to take a break and come back with Tony Clement in just a minute. Stay with us.
Well, here we are. It's great to be part of this program and great to talk about the issues that are important for not only Mississaugas, but Canadians generally.
Well, welcome back. Tonight I'm chatting with Tony Clement, former member of provincial parliament, former member of federal parliament, former minister of health in both the province of Ontario as well as the federal government. Tony, maybe I could just go back. What was it like being Minister of Health during SARS?
Well, it was pretty brutal, Brian. We had 44 deaths in Ontario, which seemed like a lot at the time. A lot of them were healthcare professionals. I'd wake up every morning as the health minister after maybe getting 3 hours sleep, and my chief medical officer of health would tell me who had passed away overnight and who was now admitted to the hospital. Those were pretty dire statistics to get first thing in the morning with your morning coffee or tea. And then it was very intense as we sought to contain this horrible disease, and it was a horrible disease. When you got it, you had a very high percentage chance of dying. It was well over 10%, and if you got it in a hospital, I think it was over 50% chance of fatality. So, and then we had the economic aspect of it, which was focused on Toronto mostly, You may recall, or your listeners may recall, that the World Health Organization at the time slapped a travel ban on Toronto. And I had to go to Geneva to the WHO and convince them that we had everything under control. And they in turn lifted the travel ban. But that was so devastating for the Toronto economy. I mean, just as we have right now in the GTA, the streets were empty, businesses were empty. Nothing much was going on in the height of SARS. So that part is very similar. What's different? Well, COVID is easily transmissible. Aside from a few examples, mostly SARS was tougher to get unless you were in a hospital setting. Here with COVID, asymptomatic transmission or pre-symptomatic transmission, there's a lot of cases of COVID out there that we don't even know about. So a much more insidious disease, unfortunately.
So far more infectious, but less lethal. Is that correct? Yeah,
less lethal, statistically less lethal, but, lethal enough, right?
Yeah.
If I've got a mother in a long-term care / retirement facility in Toronto. Three staff have contracted COVID. So, I worry about her, and I know Doug Ford's worried about his mother-in-law. We all have worries. So, it's not just theoretical. I attended my first funeral last week via teleconference. A dear friend of mine's 90-year-old father succumbed to COVID in Montreal. And we had the funeral online because that was the only way we could properly mourn his loss. So a lot of changes in culture happening as well as in public health.
Well, I think it's a terrible situation for people to be dying at all, but to be dying alone.
Yeah. That's really tough. And, for the family members. So my friend he lives in Vancouver. His father died in Montreal. He had to fly, back in a nearly empty plane to to Montreal, and then he flies back to his family, and he's got to be quarantined for 14 days. He can't even see his family for another 10 days, I think. So this is something that's being replicated all over the country, I'm sure.
Now, Tony, I interviewed a couple of people that told me, and I'm not sure of the facts exactly, but that post SARS, there was a commission, I think it was called the Campbell Commission, and came up with a bunch of recommendations. And these people were suggesting that not many of the recommendations were implemented. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, Brian, there were actually two commissions. One was the Naylor Commission, which I commissioned, David Naylor, who has now been drafted by Justin Trudeau to do the same thing, which is very interesting. And then the second one was by Judge Archie Campbell, the Campbell Commission. And the Campbell Commission specifically talked about gaps in the public health system, funding gaps, operational gaps. I mean, we were, at the time, our tracking and tracing was done by recipe cards. It wasn't automated at all. It wasn't online. It was literally public health officials scrawling information on a recipe card, getting a thumbtack and putting it on the wall. I mean, that's how how simplistic it was. So obviously, thankfully, a lot has happened in that area to do better tracing. But the other part of it that was found was that the disease was spread unwittingly by staff members who were going from institution to institution because they were part-time staff, part-time in the long-term care, part-time in hospitals, going from hospital to hospital, LTC facility to LTC facility, and spreading the virus. Well, does that sound familiar? I think it does. And so while I would say that our hospitals have learned a lot of lessons from SARS in terms of having negative isolation wards available and containing viruses like this better, that aspect in our long-term care facilities was never really addressed, unfortunately. The other thing, of course, is the availability of PPE, the personal protective equipment, the gloves, the gowns, the masks. Obviously, I would agree with those who would say we had to do a better job, or we have to do a better job of having au courant PPE available for our frontline workers, for sure.
I was told that we had quite a inventory of PPE based on the Campbell Commission, but we allowed it to expire.
I know. It's frustrating as all. I mean, I'm sure everybody's frustrated by that story. You want to tear your hair out, and that's, some people keep taking their eye off the ball. We have had events since SARS. We've had the Ebola scare, we've had H1N1 flu, we've had the MERS scare, that Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome scare. But you know what it's like in government sometimes, Brian, to keep focus when you got a million other things. You're fighting fires. It's tough sometimes. So I'm sure we'll have another lessons learned after COVID-19, and let's hope that decision makers pay heed.
One of the interesting things that I've noticed, and I think lots of people have noticed, is that politicians that you used to work with have actually, it appears to be listening to scientists and the public health people.
Yeah, and that's as it should be. Obviously, I still believe that the elected individuals have to ultimately take responsibility for decisions. You can't just transfer your authority 100% to public health officials, but you've got to listen to them. They've got to be part of the decision-making process. And I did that during SARS as well. We, these daily briefing sessions we have, I guess they're all around the world, really. I was the first one to do those. I had the public health officials at the briefing session with myself, and we actually had multi-jurisdictional. We had the medical officer of health for Toronto, Dr. Sheila Basrer, at the sessions, at these briefing sessions. We'd have Dr. Donald Lowe, who was a great epidemiologist at Toronto General, I think. He was at the briefing sessions. My own chief medical officer of health, Dr. Colin DeCuna, myself, sometimes the premier. So that's the way we ran it every day, and very similar to what other jurisdictions. When we had a question, if we didn't know the answer, we'd get the answer as quickly as we could. And if we didn't know the answer, we didn't try to BS our way through the answer. We would say, we don't know the answer, but we'll get back to you on that. But those were very important points to maintain legitimacy and credibility.
No, it's great that the different jurisdictions were working together. I know you're a student of politics. Let me ask you, I've been shocked by how partisan the differences are between the different political parties in the United States dealing with a crisis, and how nonpartisan it's been in Canada, where it's almost this sort of Team Canada approach, both
Right.
within the federal level between the Democrats and the Republicans versus the Conservatives and the Liberals, but also from a jurisdictional standpoint, where it would appear that most of the premiers are working reasonably well with the federal government, versus in the United States, where it appears that governors amongst themselves have very different points of view, and often have an extremely different point of view with the federal national government. What's the difference? Are we just nicer people? Are we less partisan? Are we working better together? Do we have better institutions, better systems? What is it?
Yeah, good question. Gosh, I mean, it's a blood sport down there, isn't it? And it's there's no room for bipartisanship there, apparently. Whereas here, you've seen Doug Ford. The media would lay it up like a law. What can you say about what Trudeau just said about this? And he wouldn't take the bait. He would say, no, we're working well with Prime Minister Trudeau. They're doing a great job. And I think that's where the public is. That's where the Canadians are. It's, everybody's got to work together. They don't want to see a hint of partisanship. Yeah, people have to be accountable. I think it is important for Parliament to meet, and I'm glad that they are meeting virtually. I'd suggested virtual meetings 3 months ago. But at the same time, hyper-partisanship, not cool. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to see it.
I know you're a student of politics as well. What about the people? I've been impressed with Doug Ford. I didn't think he was going to handle it as well as he has, and he's done a great job. In the United States, I've been very impressed with Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York State, and the president just appears to be, I don't know what the word is I should use to describe him.
Yeah, well, I think Mike Pence has been doing a good job under the circumstances.
Actually, you're right. I've been impressed.
Give props to him.
That he's been a stand-up guy.
Yeah. People want that. They want somebody who I would have thought is serious and credible. I mean, Donald Trump breaks every rule of politics, Brian. You know that. Every rule that we have as politicians, or as former politicians, or as future politicians, he just breaks the mold. So I really have no comment about his way of doing things, because it's just so alien to me. And yet he's still got 40% rock solid support that they were never going to leave him. Anyway, but Cuomo doing a great job again, giving answers, being straight up, not mincing words. Boris Johnson in the UK, same deal, and getting a lot of props for, and they've had a few issues in the UK, like their testing has been very, very poor.
Well, if you take a look at the graph, the UK graph is just still like a skyrocket.
Yeah, they're starting to flatten now. Last couple of days it's flattened, but they were off to a slow start, shall we say. But again, Boris Johnson has the ability to communicate with people on an empathetic level, similar to Doug Ford. I mean, Doug Ford, the guy, he's taking a bullet for all of us. He's empathetic, he is compassionate, he's sympathetic. So that's really worked in his favor, no question.
What do you think about Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, staying in his house? Obviously, for a while he had to, but it appears even longer than that, and doing all of the news reports from the front door.
Yeah, I don't care about that. No one cares about that. Only the inner bubble of Ottawa cares about that. So if there are conservatives who are, wagging their finger at Justin Trudeau for doing a daily news conference at his cottage, really, there are bigger fish to fry. So I think he's doing a good job. I think they were a little bit slow off the mark. I think one of the things during SARS, I kept urging the Chrétien government of the day to do more screening at our airports and cancel flights from China. Sound familiar? That's what I was doing in 2003. So I think that they could have stopped some flights, and would it have made a difference? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, heck, I guess we should have stopped flights from Italy too. So a lot of this is tough to do, and everybody's hindsight is 2020. So no, I don't have a major problem with what Justin Trudeau has acted on at all. And I think if presented with the same facts that he was presented with, I would have supported a lockdown too. I also support getting out of a lockdown, but I would have supported a lockdown. I think that was the right public policy choice.
So let's talk about getting out of the lockdown. After 9/11, security at airports was dramatically increased, and we're all going through lineups that are dramatically different in security checks and X-ray machines and whatnot that are dramatically different than would have been before 9/11. Do you think that's going to happen in a post-COVID-19 world? Are we all going to be walking through temperature machines and the like?
I'm in the tech world now. I'm actually dealing with people that are coming up with the new post-COVID economy, they call it. And tracking and tracing is a huge part of that, huge part of that. So having the ability to track COVID, people who are symptomatic, I guess is the way to put it, or who have antibodies in their system. Having an app on your phone that if you're coming too close to someone who has not got a COVID immunity card, it'll tell you to back off. These kinds of things. Obviously, there's going to be a huge debate about privacy, but I think that there are technological solutions out there that are going to help us with physical distancing, which apparently is going to be with us for some time to come. So I think that we're going to have to reconfigure things. Restaurants, they're going to start out at 50% capacity to maintain the physical distancing. Then if things are going,
Beirut, Lebanon is opening up this week, and it's 30% capacity. 2 out of every 3 tables have to be left vacant.
Yeah. So not great for restaurant owners, but better than staying closed, right? So all of these things I think are on the horizon. Just had on my podcast Mark Hebscher, a great sportscaster. We were talking about sports in the post-COVID world, and he's wondering whether the Olympics are ever going to happen again. In the foreseeable future, whether Japan Olympics next year, postponed already by a year, whether the mass gathering of several million people is a really good idea. So we're into a new sort of world with new considerations, just like you said, Brian. Post 9/11, a lot of things changed, airport security changed, and so forth. But that's the reality that we're going to be facing.
We're chatting with Tony Clement, the former Minister of Health, both provincially and federally, and interesting enough, Minister of Health provincially during SARS. We're going to take a break. I'm back with you in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Show. I've got Tony Clement, the former Minister of Health, both federally and provincially, and Minister of Health during SARS provincially. And we've been talking about sort of the post-COVID economy. Tony, some people, I had for an example, a money manager on my show that thought that we would have a depression like economy over the course of the summer. And the only way out of it was going to be massive stimulus from the federal and provincial government, big infrastructure spending. I know that you were very involved in stimulus and infrastructure spending after 2008, 2009. What do you think the government's going to have to do to get the economy going again?
Well, this is a very interesting question. And I think this is almost a unique circumstance where, in the financial crisis, there was a lack of liquidity in the marketplace. That was the big issue. And then businesses started to not be able to borrow money, and they would fail. And so the governments around the world had to prime the pump. And they did that through infrastructure spending. I believe this is a different kind of scenario, Brian, in the sense that the economy, I don't see a lack of demand. Quite frankly, people want to spend on stuff, but it's lack of supply. the shops are closed. And yes, there's been this hit in terms of employment, but I think it's equally likely that employment could bounce back fairly rapidly if the economy is opened up again. So that's maybe that's being too optimistic. I don't know, but I think it's a supply issue rather than a demand issue at this point. The medium to longer term issue is supply chains. And we've seen it from Trump and Mnuchin and other spokespeople for the U.S. government. It was coming anyway, but this is actually because of China's culpability, if you want to use that word, in hiding COVID at the initial stages, and that in itself, and the close down of the Chinese economy. I believe that there is going to be a big push to change supply chains in the world away from China towards other countries, whether it's other Asian countries like Vietnam or other countries like in Latin America, South America. So that
go even farther. You think about President Trump restricting 3M from sending masks across the border to Canada. I've had a lot of people suggest that this attitude of global supply chains is not completely, but to a certain extent, particularly in key goods like PPE and medicines and things like that, that there's going to be a big demand for local national manufacturing.
Yeah, it's already happening. The Canada and the U.S. Here's a little tidbit for you, based on some of the work I'm doing. Canada and the U.S. have signed an agreement. This was months ago on critical minerals, rare earths, and other minerals that China was trying to corner the market on and gain a strategic advantage, because these minerals are used in the defense industry, they're used in the medical sector, wherever we're manufacturing things. And so there was already a consortium being started up before COVID hit to retain a non-Chinese option on critical minerals. So you got that happening, and that's going to expand into other things other than critical minerals now because of what you just said. You've got the Belt and Road Initiative of China. So, sign up and you get a free port or a free bridge or what have you. And then there's the non-Belt and Road Initiative countries. So there's a divide there. Then you've got a divide on technology, Huawei, non-Huawei, to put it that way, but it's broader than that. Are you part of the Chinese technological and AI machine? Are you part of the American? And so this is the world now. It really is divided into two. And it was kind of inevitable that supply chains would follow that. What I'm saying is it's speeding up because people want it to happen sooner rather than later.
So what do you think is going to happen? Are we going to have a dramatic reduction in globalization, and is this going to be tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers, or how is it actually going to be implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is what's going to happen. That the globalization as we know it is dead. Look at the response to the COVID crisis, Brian. Was that an international multilateral response? No, it was the exact opposite of that. Every country for itself. That's where people look to for answers and help. And the WHO, I think, regardless of what you think of Trump, I think the WHO has a lot of questions to answer when this is done. So that was the multilateral UN institution on public health and infection control. That's on the wayside. So even in COVID, where you'd think that there would be the most pressure for a multilateral approach, it's the exact opposite of that. So yeah, I think that globalization, the globalized institutions that were built up after the Second World War, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, Bretton Woods, whatever, all of that has obviously come under great pressure over even before Trump, but certainly accelerated with Trump. And now we've got COVID. They're really evidence of it rather than the reason for it, if I can put it that way. Isn't
this a lot of the same impacts that happened in 1930, 1931, where there was, after the stock market collapse, a huge amount of establishment of tariff barriers and nationalization or lack of globalization, international trade, etc. Are we repeating ourselves? I'm going to make things from an economic standpoint even worse.
In a sense, and I worry about that. And as a conservative, I want there to be freer trade. I think that has lifted many hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, is freer trade. So I'm a believer in preserving free trade, but putting some things in place so that it still has the approval of the people. You can't have globalization and free trade and then 30% of your country in poverty, hooked on meth. That's not sustainable. And I may be exaggerating a bit, but that's what Trump wrote into power.
Actually, it's interesting. I interviewed the head of a substance abuse private hospital, and she told me that after Friday, May 13th, which is the date that she says was the critical date that took us from a pre to a post COVID-19 world, demand for her services is up 500%.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be part of the story after this is over. Drug abuse, suicides, domestic violence. It's not going to be pretty. So I guess my point is that you've got to have a global trading system that helps more people, that lifts, the tide has got to lift a lot more boats than just people on each coast and the global elite.
No question. So you were there in government federally during the Great Recession in 08, 09. That appeared to be a multilateral solution to the problem. Why is it so different today than then?
Because that was 2009 and this is 2019. A lot has changed in the world, and I guess that was the last gasp of multilateral approaches and global approaches through G20 and other means. And it was primarily a international financial crisis. And so you could use international cooperation to deal with an international financial crisis. Maybe that's part of the answer to your question. This is something very different. It's hitting my mother. It's hitting, my friend's father, all of these things that are much more close to home. There's no memo or media release from the G20 that is going to stop COVID-19.
What's this going to do to tourism in Muskoka?
Oh, it's not looking good. There's not going to be a lot of international travel. So that aspect of it is bad. And already, I mean, people have cottages in Muskoka. It's the place where in Muskoka, there's 8,000 lakes. People want to have that. And already there's a lot of discontent amongst local permanent residents about cottagers coming up. And, we've only had 17 cases so far in Muskoka and one dead, which, all things considered is better than a lot of different communities. So there's a lot of resentment if people start coming up when the weather warms up. So you're going to see a lot of social tensions. I see it everywhere.
From a real estate agent, not Muskoka, but up north, suggesting that all the infections in their area had been imported from Toronto and effectively saying, Torontonians, stay home. We don't want you up filling up the hospitals with COVID-19 infections. Yeah,
well, they were, in Muskoka's case, there was a cluster around some people who had traveled to Austria and had come back. And then I think I'm not sure it's Toronto. I think it's probably Florida. A lot of people came back from Florida. And they unwittingly, because they were asymptomatic, brought it up to Muskoka. So, it's creating tension. And we're going to see tension in our society between people who want to keep things locked down and people who want to open things up. You see that tension as well. So these are all things that have to be managed. How? By political leadership that has credibility and has authenticity. That's the only way to manage things like this.
And yet you look at the example of the United States and the governor of Georgia opening up tattoo parlors and massage parlors and things like that. Is that the kind of credibility that's
That's going to be interesting because here's a wager I'd like to present to you. So yeah, okay, you can go to a restaurant in Georgia or you can go to a tattoo. Let's see how many people actually do that. It's one thing to have your right to do that. It's another thing to exercise your right. So let's see, because the early reports I've heard are you can shoot a cannon through these restaurants right now. It's people are not flocking back. Now, maybe they will after a while. I don't know. But that's the initial response, I think, is going to be rather tentative.
What's this going to do to urban downtowns? Is Toronto going to be not a ghost town, but far less populous? Are a lot less people going to be commuting to downtown Toronto to go into office buildings and restaurants and malls in the future?
Yeah, I mean, and what about urban transport? Everybody was placing their chips onto buses and trains and things where you pack people in like sardines. Air travel, is it going to be the same again ever? These are open questions now. And with the really turbocharged telecommuting and teleconferencing, how much of office space will you need in the future? And when you have office space, it's going to be the open office space of the present. Everybody took down the walls and everybody had collaborative work environments where you're at the same table. That's not the COVID way. So all of these things are going to have to change.
Or are we all going to forget about it? And, a month or 6 months, we're all going to go back to our old ways.
Yeah, but that's assuming COVID disappears. I wouldn't, if I were you, I wouldn't wager on that right now. I don't see it disappearing anytime soon.
Well, I think I'm actually strongly of the belief that we're going to have a second wave that's going to come back in the fall that's going to be quite negative.
Yeah.
And I think that it's going to end up being one of those situations where some of the cities, states, et cetera, that open up too early and in too lax of an environment are going to be hit. And I think your comment about the Spanish flu epidemic hitting Canada only on the second wave is maybe going to be the result in Saskatchewan and or some of the sort of Midwestern states in the United States that really haven't had that much of infection rate yet. And so they're not going to have much herd immunity. And if and when the virus comes to that jurisdiction, it could go like wildfire, just like it did in New York City.
Or maybe none of us have immunity because the strain changes. It mutates in some way. And, all of this was for naught. I hate to be a chicken little here, but all of that is still possible. And I'm sure keeps a lot of people up at night.
Now, you were Minister of Health twice. What about anti-vaxxers? Because one of the solutions here is going to be that we're going to have to eventually come up with a vaccine and get a whole bunch of people to take it. How did you deal with anti-vaxxers?
It wasn't a movement then. This is all modern. I mean, when I was Ontario Health Minister in 2003, we didn't have social media. My BlackBerry pager would go off. So let's put things in perspective here. A lot has changed in 17 years for sure. And
okay, so pretend you're Minister of Health now. What would you do?
Yeah, I mean, I actually instituted the first free flu shot campaign when I was Ontario Minister of Health. Get your flu shot, and we had 60% compliance, which was amazing. And it wasn't because of anti-vaxxing. It was just like people, didn't find the time or didn't think they needed it. But that kept our emergency wards freer in the wintertime to deal with other cases other than flu cases. So yeah, I'm obviously a big fan of that. I also funded the HPV vaccine, which that became a little controversial. I did that as federal health minister, and the anti-vaxxing movement was starting to generate there. But vaccines work. What can I tell you?
No question. And I've had a doctor on my show a few times who's constantly been reminding us before COVID-19 came, and washing your hands, cough and sneeze into your elbow, and get the flu vaccine. And, the one positive that might come out of this is all of us might get a lot more vaccines in the future than we have in the past.
Well, one can hope. We never developed a SARS vaccine. It never happened. So I just hope that they find the magic formula that develops a COVID vaccine, and that it's available around the world. Because that's the thing I'm worried about as well.
The biggest tragedy, if there's any way of saying one tragedy is worse than another tragedy, but to me is seniors' homes, long-term care.
Yeah.
Have we got a problem? Lack of regulation, or like what is it? What do we need to do to make seniors' homes hygienic and healthy?
Well, I think there's varying degrees of seniors' homes in terms of their ability to do that, and I think it's going to take a lot more funding. And it can't be ghettoized. You've got to get top-notch people running seniors' homes and working in seniors' homes, long-term care facilities in particular. So, yeah, I think there's going to have to be a radical rethink on that front.
We're chatting with Tony Clement, former Minister of Health, both federally and provincially, a long-term politician. We're going to take one last break for traffic and messages and come back with you in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Show. Real pleasure to chat for a couple of minutes with Tony Clement, a political warhorse from like 25 years worth of political life. Regional council race back in 1990. What was it?
1994.
1994. Student politics at University of Toronto before that. Time in provincial politics, time in federal politics, cabinet minister experience. Tony, what are you doing now?
I'm having fun. I had a good run in politics, 25 years, but it was time to move on. And so I've decided to take a portfolio approach. So I've got my political interests still. I'm still a member of the Conservative Party and active. I've got my media interests. I've got a podcast called And Another Thing Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio. We talk about popular culture, societal trends, and politics, of course. I've got another show called Boom and Bust, which is on the newsforum.ca, which is a business and financial show. And then I've got my business interests, including a Mississauga company, Brian, called DG Market. It's an e-procurement site around the world. But our offices are on Robert Speck Parkway. You probably know that address.
I do.
So that's one opportunity. I'm also involved in a company called Magnify, with an I at the end, magnify.io, which is a teleconferencing company, not quite the size of Zoom, but our usage has gone up about 2,000% since COVID. And finally, I'm doing some strategic advice on Canada-U.S. trade relations. So a busy time, but it's nice to put my skills to use still.
Well, it's a shame to not see you in politics. You were one of my favorite politicians. As some people may know, I'm probably a little bit left-wing of you, but I was very proud to contribute to some of your leadership campaigns and support you. I think, frankly, one of the best lines I ever saw in a political campaign, let me see if I get it right. You were running for leader of the federal Conservative Party, maybe, I think at the time, and your line was in regards to Stephen Harper, images in your mirror may be closer than you think.
Yeah, well, he didn't, when he beat me, at least he wasn't spiteful, so he put me in his cabinet right away. So no, I have no complaint there.
Well, I thought you were a fantastic politician and you're a wonderful gentleman. So all the best with all of your endeavors today. And anytime you want to make a noise about whatever issue is passionate to you, feel free to give me a call and I'll help publicize it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
What do you think of the current Conservative leadership campaign, and should they have sort of put it on hiatus?
I thought that they should put it on hiatus. I think that the current speculation is it'll be back on again in August, which I think is appropriate because I think we do need strong new leadership in the House of Commons as a way to have accountability and also to put those views in front of the people in the next election. I'm supporting Aaron O'Toole. I know Aaron very well, and I know Peter MacKay very well, and So no, this isn't about Peter, but I feel very comfortable that Aaron, with his background in the Canadian services, as well as a lawyer, as well as a former cabinet minister, make him the right choice. But looking forward to that race being over, and then and some normalcy in politics would be nice as well. And then the people can decide once again.
You've had experience both in suburban politics, running in Brampton, as well as less suburban, running up in Muskoka. During the last campaign, the Conservative Party didn't appear to appeal to suburban Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. Why, and what do you think they need to change?
Yeah, their message fell flat. I think the tagline or the slogan was, "It's time for you to get ahead." No one really knew what that meant. And to the extent they knew what it meant a couple of extra bucks in their jeans through a tax cut. It wasn't a compelling vision. So I think that we've got to do a better job on fleshing out something better in terms of an alternative approach. The other thing is our party is afflicted with, what afflicted the Liberal Party when they were in opposition. And when the Liberals were in opposition, they had this abiding hatred of Stephen Harper. Us in opposition, Conservatives in opposition, we have this abiding hatred of Justin Trudeau. That's just not good enough. That's not good enough. That's not, for 20% of the population, that's a good enough reason to vote for the Conservative Party. But people need something more than we think Trudeau is a schnook. It's just not a great tagline. So I'm hoping that the new leader will come up with a compelling narrative about why conservative, not only values, but applying principles to better public policy choices is going to make a difference in their lives. If you can't articulate that, you shouldn't be running. I'm
a fiscal conservative, and I was surprised that no one seemed to be talking about fiscal issues enough. And I just don't think the social conservatism played in suburban Ontario.
Yeah, and the problem with the fiscal conservatism was for the last few years, it wasn't the flavor of the month. People weren't articulating it well enough. And Trudeau outmaneuvered the NDP and said, "Oh, we can have a $10 billion deficit, no big deal." And of course, he had a much higher deficit than that. but it seemed to take fiscal conservatism off the plate. Now we're going to have deficits of, not debt, but deficits, of tens and tens and maybe even over $100 billion when this is all said and done.
Deficits or debts of World War II or post-World War II type amounts, are we not?
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. Can I draw one analogy for you, Brian? Please. I just finished reading a book about Clement. And he was a British politician. He was the Labour leader. He was the deputy prime minister in the Second World War. He was deputy prime minister to Winston Churchill. As a Labour leader, he was the deputy prime minister. During the war hadn't ended yet, Attlee won a stunning majority over Winston Churchill. During the war, they had a general election, and Attlee won because people were sick and tired of all the sacrifice. And Labour offered them better health care, better education, better social welfare. They voted for that because they want all their sacrifice during the war. They wanted to mean something. Then Attlee gets in, and for years, they had rationing in the UK. Couldn't get butter, couldn't get chocolate, couldn't get eggs, couldn't get meat. And Attlee, year after year, would say, we just need a little bit more sacrifice because it's important for the future. And people went along with that because, British people, Canadians, we want to do the best for everybody, right? But after a while, people want something for themselves too. And Attlee was turfed out of office by Churchill again, because Churchill said, basically, it's time to party. Let's loosen up here. So it's going to be very interesting in this post-COVID political world. Who's on the side of austerity and who's on the side of loosening up? Because, people may say that they're, one for all and all for one, but after a while,
it gets very tiresome. So there's my
Well,
little political
you're sure
anecdote
seeing
of the
it in the
day.
United States right now, where you've got these protests where a lot of people are effectively saying a haircut is more important than your grandma or grandpa's life.
Yeah, and it sounds absurd, doesn't it? But after a while, in year 6 of that, it doesn't sound so absurd. This is what I'm trying to say.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the different political campaigns are, a year or a year and a half from now, when undoubtedly we're going to have another election.
We will see, as they say.
Well, Tony Clement, it's a pleasure to chat with you again. I'm glad you're doing well. It looks like you're deep in the woods in Muskoka, forest bathing, enjoying some solitude during our social isolation, which, I think is the wrong term. It should be physical isolation.
Physical.
Social, and it's been great to connect up with you socially again. I hope things are well.
For sure. My pleasure.
All the best, Tony.
For sure.